Hello, Yiwei. How are you?
Good, good. Thanks for having me on today.
Thank you for being here. Welcome to Rare Awareness Radio. And we are so excited today to speak with Yiwei, the founder of the TNPO2 Foundation. And you're coming to us from New York today, which is exciting. And we were just talking a minute about how it's like spring in New York and spring in Boston, but it's the end of October. It's
Yeah,
crazy.
yeah, no, it's really nice. It's getting a little chilly, but
Yeah,
yeah.
it's nice though, right? Yeah, I love it. It's interesting. I can remember like 10 years ago we had a blizzard on Halloween, so it's climate change, I guess, right? But
Yeah,
I'm so excited to talk with you. I'm so excited that we were able to get introduced to each other. And thank you for being, really one of our very first a handful of guests on this new show and the work that we're trying to do to drive more awareness into rare disease. So I really appreciate that, Yiwei, and you coming on. And I know you're very busy. So I would love for you to maybe just start by telling us a little bit about you, and
sure.
then certainly a little bit about the TNPO2 Foundation and what you guys are all about.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I came to the U.S. when I was 7, so I was an immigrant
Wow.
here, and then I was I think pretty normal upbringing,
Yeah.
and then I went to college, did grad school. I ended up in academic mathematics, so that was very exciting and fun
Did
for me.
you study like applied mathematics or
No, no,
theoretical math or?
it was theoretical math, so I
Okay.
was very, very into theoretical math.
Okay. Yeah,
Um,
your brain is very different than my brain.
yeah, but people usually tell me they hate math and this and that, and I'm like, well, maybe you didn't have the right teachers, so that
Right. No, I
just
agree with you on that because math is a beautiful thing, right? You just have
absolutely,
to
yeah,
have the right people show you how to get your mind around it.
exactly, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Um, and then, after I left academia, I did a very brief stint in Silicon Valley at an AI startup. So that was
Ah,
that
cool.
was also very fun. Um,
Yeah.
it's it's exploded a lot since I left the field. So
Goodness, it's
yes,
everywhere. Yeah.
right, yeah. So AI is very exciting. And then, I settled down, so to speak, and had a family. And that is how I guess that's how I ended up in this rare disease community.
Yeah.
Um, my second child, Leo, he was born with what's called a de novo,
Okay.
genetic disease. So that means that like this could happen to anybody.
Mm.
It was not in the family. There was no inkling. We had no inkling that he was going to be born sick. Uh,
Mm.
and it's not inherited, like I said, and it's just an accident. Um,
Wow.
in the I guess when he was a single cell, when he was
Yeah.
we don't know, if it happened before or after, but a single letter in his DNA was misspelled,
Mm.
uh, and that affects him. That has a very, very severe
Effect
prognosis.
on him, yeah. And as a mathematician, I mean, it must be mind-boggling to you. Like, what was the statistical probability of that?
Yeah, so for him, so for his specific mutation, only one patient had been identified worldwide.
Wow.
So it's incredibly rare, which, it's a bit deceptive, these
Sure.
statistics, because, like his mutation is very, very rare.
Hmm.
But as a community, patients with these, what's called monogenic, something is wrong with a single gene, they're
Right.
actually very prevalent. There's a high
Mm.
prevalence.
Of
And there's
monogenic syndrome. Yeah.
Yes, yes, and there's a high prevalence among pediatric patients.
Mm.
So a lot of children, what's usually diagnosed as cerebral palsy or
Okay.
epilepsy, or even autism, like let's say profound autism. There's usually, if you look deeper, you will
They're
find
misdiagnosis. Yeah.
yeah, 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 or there is a more precise diagnosis available, like
Mm.
this TMPO. Well, I guess his gene is TMPO2.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah.
And so how old is he now?
He is now 3. He just turned
Three?
3. Yeah.
Okay. Wow. That's amazing. And the foundation is about 2 years old, 2.5 years old at this point as a
That's
result?
right. Yes, that's right.
Yeah.
We started the foundation as soon as he was diagnosed.
Mm.
Yeah. So, we wanted to so I guess along the way, in my life journey, I picked up some skills, and our family, was reasonably comfortable when he was born.
Right.
And so when he was diagnosed, we wanted to do everything that our family
You
could.
could. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So the foundation was born 2.5 years ago. Tell me about sort of the nuts and bolts of the foundation, what its vision is. I know you are very focused on emerging technologies as part of what you're doing with TNPO2.
Yes, absolutely. So, so our immediate focus when we started was Leo,
Mm,
and trying to make an intervention, a therapeutic intervention that
mm,
had a chance of rescuing as much of his life as possible.
sure.
Um, because if you think, he was 4.5 months old when he was diagnosed,
Mm,
and I don't know if well, it's very, there was a case at Boston Children's a few years ago where they made a drug, a drug for a single patient that was customized to one patient.
wow.
And
To one patient's actual physiology.
yes, exactly, to
Wow.
one patient's, genetic mutation and
Mm,
genetic, people say defect, but genetic,
yeah.
yeah, diagnosis.
Yeah.
And so we saw that case and we thought, why can't we do the same for Leo? Let's do it for Leo. And not only that, but this case at Boston Children's, they had done it in record time. So they managed to go from diagnosis to clinical trial in about 10 months.
Wow.
And we thought, okay, like great,
Yeah.
let's build on
Let's
that.
how do we replicate that? Yeah.
Yeah, and maybe we can even go even faster because that was several years ago, right? There's
Mhm.
progress and stuff.
Yeah,
And
there's all kinds of scalability now, right? And we were just talking about AI and other
yeah,
advancements, right?
technology, yeah. So
Mm,
I think the only I don't know if downside is the right word, but the only difference we had was that other patient had been terminal,
mm.
and Leo wasn't terminal. So people
Thank
are,
God.
yes,
Yeah.
thank God, yes,
Yeah.
thank God he wasn't terminal, so we didn't
Right.
have a ticking clock.
Right.
On the other hand, everybody is a lot more conservative, right? Obviously,
Mm.
well, not obviously, but if you have a child that's going to die, people are more willing to take risks.
Sure.
Um,
Sure.
and
Yeah.
so
Because what do you have to lose at that point, right? It's yeah.
exactly,
Yeah.
yeah. So yeah, so we wanted to do something similar, and I guess we tried, or I tried my best with the foundation to do so.
Okay.
Um, yeah,
Yeah.
and yeah,
And how did you go about like just the mechanisms of the foundation? I mean, like you said, your background is in you're a theoretical mathematician. You've got all this experience in technology, but now you're running a nonprofit. I mean, how did that come about?
yeah. So I guess it's kind of like where there's a will, there's a way,
Yeah.
um, and the it's more like is there a way to solve this problem that I had?
Mm,
And I think Leo having these intractable seizures and like sometimes they would last hours, and the developmental delays that had been piling up.
right.
It was a real problem, right? So how do we solve this problem that I had
Mm,
with science, right? With
hmm.
science, with technology, and so I threw all of my. So I guess I had a lot of technical training, so that let
Right.
me read, like dive into the scientific literature right away. And so the next step was to assemble a team that could actually do the research because I
Yeah.
yeah
Sure.
I could read papers and I could search bioinformatics databases all day long, but I didn't have a lab.
Somebody had to do the work, be at a bench doing the work,
Exactly,
right?
yeah.
Yeah.
Somebody had to
Yeah.
do, somebody had to culture cells, somebody had to synthesize oligos, somebody had to inject some rodents with all these
Right.
things. So
Right. Yeah. Or zebrafish or something, right? Yeah.
exactly. Yeah, yeah. So actually, so this is actually a pretty. This is not that uncommon for parents of children with rare diseases. So like this is a actually a very familiar story.
Yeah.
That I've now met dozens of people who
They
have
all the work, the conversations that I've had, and again, thank you again for being part of our first handful of folks to come on and talk with us. They seem to follow a little bit of a similar pattern of like, maybe there's a Facebook group that starts the
yeah,
conversation or some sort of affinity, and then that kind of continues to grow and scale and becomes a foundation, maybe becomes a 501c3 nonprofit or what
yeah.
have you. So it sounds like a little bit of a similar pathway here for you with TNPO2.
That's correct. Yes, and
Yeah,
I think like all the other parents, this was somehow the one of the worst pieces of news you could
of
probably get.
course, horrible.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and so like other parents, we reached out to our entire network for help
right.
and just said, like, here's the situation. Please help us. We'll take
Mm,
we'll take any help
yeah,
that you're going to
yeah.
provide.
What
So
are Oh, go
yeah,
ahead.
no, you go, you go.
I was just so speaking of parents, I was going to ask you, what are some of the resources and things that you provide through the foundation for parents?
So that's a good question. So first, we are trying to build a program in our local community.
Okay.
So I
Local
think
of New York?
of New York, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, of New York. Because the diagnosis stage is actually it's still a big barrier for many, many patients.
Mm,
So geneticists, medical geneticists are in short supply.
sure.
It's difficult to get a whole genome sequence test um, uh, prescribed
Hmm.
by anyone who's not a geneticist. And so if you don't have, a precision diagnosis, it's very hard to go on to the next step of trying to find, a precision therapeutic to address it.
Sure.
Um, our website also has some links to other nonprofits. So I think this is not our specialty or our expertise, but
Right.
there's another nonprofit called the Courageous Parents Network, and I
Ah,
think they provide really really great resources for parents who are thrown into our healthcare system, and so they are now if you get a diagnosis like this, you are going to be let's say a frequent flyer of our
right.
healthcare system. And so it's a difficult system. It's very bureaucratic and hard, frankly,
Sure.
on all the participants, but especially I think caregivers and parents and patients. But they provide talking points, questions. How do you
Yeah.
advocate for yourself or your child?
Sure.
Make sure that they get the care they need, and if you have concerns, make sure they're addressed and they're not kind of
Right.
lost. Yeah.
Lost, yeah. And I don't want to misspeak, Yiwi, so please correct me. It seems like with Leo, the diagnosis kind of went relatively quickly, because I've certainly spoke with parents where, gosh, the getting to diagnosis took months or maybe even a year, right?
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
that's correct. So
yeah,
we were very lucky in that one of our friends, I think, who was more aware of this problem than we were.
sure.
I think, without any prior exposure to the problem, it flies under the radar, and
Hmm.
nobody outside the community really understands it. But
Yeah.
one of our friends noticed that we were taking Leo to all of these medical appointments, and they said, "Hey, have you thought about maybe going to Boston Children's
Mm,
to this clinical trial?"
yeah,
So that's how Leo got his diagnosis so quickly, is
sure.
that a very kind of well-intentioned and well-informed friend pointed out,
Pointed
like
you in the
noticed
direction.
yeah, noticed
Yeah,
that we might be in this situation, and then pointed us to the exact resource that we needed to
sure.
connect with,
Yeah,
to find it. And so, like, a clinical trial at Boston Children's, it's not the most accessible thing, right? Like,
right.
when you start down this diagnostic odyssey, the first thing you do is not go, escalate all the way up to Boston Children's and to
Sure.
a research study at that.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's the accessibility part is so interesting to me. Iwi, my niece, we live in Boston, as you know, and my niece had a nerve sheath tumor on her back, and a schwannoma type tumor. And it got she had the neurosurgery, the tumor was removed, and luckily the tumor was benign, but she did has some genetic counseling post-op as a result, just to understand. And I felt extremely fortunate, right? Because here we lived in Boston, and
Yeah.
we had Boston Children's Hospital, and we had the accessibility, and she was able to immediately meet with a genetic counselor post-op and kind of walk through all of the conditions of why she had this tumor, and was she had a genetic predisposition for more tumors, and were these tumors potentially going to be malignant versus benign, and all these conversations that we had, and genetic testing that was done for both her mom and her dad. Very fortunate to have that
Yeah,
kind of accessibility, but that's not
absolutely.
the case, right?
That's
In
not the case.
Yeah,
Absolutely, like, for, almost, let's say, 99% of the children, in our country.
right,
Um, and so I guess our foundation, our first goal is to make the kind of genetic testing that is, that should be economically accessible. So there are studies out there that demonstrate the economic sustainability of whole genome sequencing in certain indications, with the correct exclusion criteria.
right.
This actually saves the healthcare system money, despite how
Mm,
expensive it is. So there's still the work of actually making it standard of care, right? So
Right.
first of all, it's such a huge improvement upon standard of care for the patients, and second of all, it's affordable, and not only affordable, but positive ROI for our healthcare system. So let's make it happen, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Uh,
Iwi, can you talk a little bit about the different types of organizations that you're partnering with and how you kind of go about doing, I mean, for lack of a better word, that's a lot of that is almost business development, right? I mean, that's,
that's right. That's true.
yeah.
Yeah, so our first partnership was with an AI first biotech.
Mm,
So we worked with Crayon Bio to jointly
yep.
co-develop Leo's drug, and I think people were kind of warning me about them, and how they had never made a drug, and how maybe
Sure.
they
Yeah. Well, yeah, but
yeah,
yeah,
so they started in 2019, right? So that was before AI really had its breakout moment. Um, but if you look at their public patents and the technology, it does make sense. And so
mm,
I guess that's where my math and first principles thinking helped
sure.
out a bit. And so like
Right.
it wasn't clear that we had made the right choice, but we thought we would gain some time and some quality, I think, on the drug as well. And I
Mm.
think that turned out to that turned out to be true.
Turned out to be the right thing. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So we were, I think partnered with them in let's say March to May of 2022. So again,
Okay.
before ChatGPT came out and swept the world.
Yeah, yes. I just came from the Health Innovation Conference in Las Vegas last week, and I would have to say, Iwi, that 60% of the companies there were touting some sort of AI capability or
Right.
AI adjacency, right?
Yeah, yeah,
60, I would say 60%. It was everywhere, right? I mean,
yeah.
everywhere. Yeah.
So I mean,
But
yeah, that said, I
yeah,
having done AI in the last wave, I do want to hold my horses a little bit, right? Because
right.
AI marketing and AI hype is not always accurate. So in the healthcare space, it's important to do your due diligence on the AI claims. But
Sure.
the opportunity for incredible patient benefit is there.
Yeah.
I think that is true, and I think it's important. It's also important for the patient voice and the patient priorities
Mm,
to be represented in the conversation, because you know insurance companies are using AI to mass deny claims, which is really not, the putting patients first. And
not at
sometimes,
all.
no, no. So it's important to figure out like what is the AI doing? Is there proper quality control in place?
Sure.
And yeah, to really validate whether or not the AI is really improving the product in
Right. No, and I hear you. And that was a big part of what came out of this conference as well, was sort of like the proper usage of AI. And, AI has so much opportunity to create more accessibility, create avenues of sort of, democratization of things. But
yeah,
at the same time, like to your point, like using AI to do utilization denial of claims in
yeah,
mass
yeah,
is not exactly kind of in the vein of accessibility and access.
exactly. Yeah,
One of the principles that I found very fascinating about TNPO2 when I was looking through your what you folks stand behind,
yeah.
and that was your principle of technology to advance equity.
Yes, yes,
Mm,
absolutely, yes.
yeah.
Um, so yeah, so I think um, that's also why one of the, I guess, not the primary reason we partner with the biotech that we did, but
Mm,
the premise behind, or the vision that our partners had, was that they could make, they could at least design these ASOs, these precision medicines,
mm,
in the future, for almost no kind of incremental cost, right?
mm.
So in drug development is extremely expensive. So
Oh
you
my
need
gosh,
something,
so expensive. Yeah.
yeah, you need something that's safe and efficacious, right? But if you could move as much of the design into the in silico phase, and
Yep.
which some of it is already there, right? But
Right.
it's a process. So the more you can move into the in silico phase, the cheaper it becomes.
Right.
And the question is like, can almost say 100% of it be moved into the in silico?
Typical
Um,
phase. Yeah. Yeah. So I've talked to organizations that are trying to do that as well. Speaking of pharma, right? Look, this is hard, right? I mean, even though one of the statistics on your website, right, talks about a quarter of a million children suffering from neurodevelopmental and neurodegenerative conditions that could be treatable with precision medicine. Big
Yes.
pharma, it's just, the cohort isn't there, right, Yiwei? So are you optimistic that we can get big pharma to pay attention, or are you kind of thinking, no, it's going to be more of the organizations that you're already partnering with that are smaller and maybe more innovative, progressive, doing more in situ, those types of conversations, or in silico? What do you think there?
So I would love it if anyone from big pharma,
Yeah.
would become interested in this space, because
Mm,
the patient need is there, the patient population is there, the
right.
amount of resources that the healthcare system is throwing at these patients, that's all there, right? So
Right.
there's a lot of value to be created for these patients. However, the model that big pharma is familiar with is very, very different, right?
Right.
That model really does not work for these patients, and also, frankly, the FDA's way of regulating these products, and how these products can get to market
It's
is just not friendly. It's actually incredibly hostile to
draconian. Yeah.
yeah, it's one, and I think I heard a British regulator, or an ex-British regulator, a British ex-regulator, say that there should be proportionate regulation, right? There should be a proportionate consideration of risks and benefits,
Mm,
and I think that's I think the FDA is trying to do a good job. I think they're listening, and they're hearing and understanding the problems, but as it is, it's still kind of a they're trying to push a square peg through a round hole,
right.
the round hole being their way of doing things, and the square peg being these rare disease
Right.
therapeutics. And it's like they're like, how do I say this, it's like they're sandpapering the edges of the square peg, and it's still
Oh,
not
and
working.
it's still try yeah, and still trying to
Yeah,
push it through, but it's still not working, right? Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah. Oh my gosh, that's a really good way of putting it. Yeah, I appreciate that. Yeah. Um, in terms of what's next for you, right? As you kind of I can't believe it. We're barreling down on the end of 2024, right?
yeah.
Here we are looking into 2025. You know, Leo is 3. You said now, like, what are you kind of most excited for, Yiwei, as we come into the next year for TNPO2? What are some of the big milestones you're hoping to kind of chase
Yeah.
towards?
So Leo has been in his trial for 15 months now.
Hmm.
So, and I think what's new is that FDA recently approved a dosage increase for him. So we get to dose him more often.
Okay.
Um, and I think that's one of the examples where, for Leo to get his medicine more often, despite the fact that we were seeing, seizures recur before his maintenance period was up,
Sure.
uh, we had to go back and get FDA approval, right? And that took a very long time. And so, like, there's a question of, like, why does a single patient, with his clinical
With
trial,
right.
need the federal
So much.
government?
Yeah.
Yeah,
So much.
the entire federal government, or not the entire, but this federal
I'm
agency.
sure
So
it feels that way.
yeah,
I'm sure it feels that way.
yeah. So I'm looking forward to more efficacy, hopefully more efficacy from his trial,
Yeah.
which will help us with our next projects.
Mm,
So, one of our projects is Project Baby Lion, which is,
right.
how do we get patients diagnosed sooner? And not only that, but how do we connect those diagnosed patients with the resources, and with the, say, like, a drug development path,
Hmm.
or a drug repurposing path, and
Hmm.
the organizations that do those things quickly. How
Yeah.
do we build these pipelines, right? How do we build these pipelines? How do we build it in a systematic fashion? Because so far, what's been happening is these individual foundations and patient advocacy groups kind of reinventing the wheel each time. And I had to do that too. And I wish that someone had built, a more systematic solution, so that it wasn't just, the doctors are saying, look, there's nothing we can do, go home. And
Yeah.
yeah. So that's what I would love to do with the foundation, starting with the diagnosis, you know, i- in a systematic fashion.
Well, and I'm not surprised that you have being an engineer yourself that you have this very systematic approach to what you are doing. And with Project Baby Lion, it sounds like you folks are going to be poised for success in what you were doing. I really appreciate that. Um, in terms of your advisory board, very impressive group of people that are part of that. Is that something that was challenging for you to put together? Did people kind of raise their hand and want to be part of this community? Talk to me a little bit about that.
Well, yes, it was challenging to get these people together. I think I kind of hunted them down. Is
Yeah.
the way to say it is, it's like we found an expert in rare genetics. Dr. Wendy Chung is a
Yeah.
world renowned
Yeah.
geneticist.
World renowned. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and Dr. Scott, oh, I'm sorry for forgetting Scott's, led one of the first LNA, one of the first clinical LNA trials for Angelman syndrome.
Yeah.
Dr. Hugo Bellin, his lab
Yeah.
diagnosed Leo's disease, and that paper was published only a few months before Leo was born.
Wow.
So these people were, they're very busy, so they're hard to
Right.
get a hold of. But I think I communicated the vision of what we were trying to do, which is
Mm.
to essentially try to rescue a patient. It's not the next generation patients, right? It's this generation patient.
This current. Yeah.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
this
Yeah.
so I
Yeah.
think technology and progress has gotten to the point where if we diagnose a patient, there is a realistic hope for developing a therapeutic to treat that patient. And
Mm.
that's a whole new paradigm because, that's a lot of, if you think about it in a horizontal way, right?
Hmm.
It's like a whole generation of patients that are now, rescuable, right?
Yeah.
And I hope that that vision and that like goal is enticing to other potential advisors.
I hope so as well. I mean, just everything you're doing around the hopes of developing these individualized treatments relatively quickly, just to me seems like with precision medicine, there's just so much potential there, right? And so much opportunity there. So I hope also that you get more people who are interested in this, right? And want to be a part of your community. That's phenomenal. We have been speaking with Yiwei, the founder of the TNPO2 Foundation, Project Baby Lion. Thank you so much. I am continuously in awe of folks like you who are faced with this reality of here's an ultra rare diagnosis for your child. There's no treatment options, but yet you are like, that's not acceptable. And you are just trying so many ways to break that barrier of there's no known treatment options. Okay, well, fine. We're going to create some treatment options, right?
Yeah,
Just
yeah.
I stand in awe of folks like you who are doing this. So thank you for all the work that you're doing, and best of luck to Leo and you, and also to the TNPO2 Foundation. I think folks can find you at tnpo2.org. Is that right?
Yes, that's right. And
Hey,
yes.
we'll hope to send them over there. Once again, Yiwei, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate speaking with you this morning.
Yeah, thank you for having me on. Thanks.